Hey guys, Larry from Real HiFi Help. So let's just revisit a video that I made some years ago. This video here, one of my most viewed videos, the best amplifier in the world. So do I still think that it's the best amplifier in the world? Well, actually, yes, I do. And here is exactly why. I wrote down some points here. If you're into music, like really music on a high level, I think that these are probably the most important points ever in hi-fi to really connect with music. That is the taste, texture, taste, tonality, theme, style, emotional range, and freestyling magic. And together, doing this in a direct, reactive manner that is not in the traditional tubey waved type of sound, I feel that it gives the sound of music. So this amplifier, the OTO amplifier, I feel that it's the best combination of transistor and tube amp sound that you can get. Are there other amps that beat this amp in certain aspects of the sound? Definitely. There are at least 100 of those amps in this world, perhaps even 200 amps. One of those amps, probably the Gryphon Apex, which I still haven't heard, but my Yamaha friend heard, has one of the most powerful grips that you will ever get to have as an amplifier. I heard this from my Yamaha friend, from the amplifier to the speaker. One of the most powerful grips, one of the most meaty sounds that exists, one of the most perfectionistic, highly resolving sounds. So much that is better about that Gryphon sound than this sound. I can go over to Audio Note Ongaku. It has a level of purity and deeper warmth to it, and it has a more sort of a agile, evil type of sound, more grip, yada 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 yada. But here's the point I'm trying to make. All of these amps, all these fantastic, great amps in the world that have been produced, they do isolated pieces of the sound a little bit better to a lot better than this amp. Okay? But those are still separate parts of the detail that in the end don't quite come together and integrate and balance the way that this amp does. I know because I have owned this amp now for, I don't know how many years it is, if it's like 6 or 7 years or how many years it is now. This amp, I have heard it in its level 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, something like that range. And I have to tell you guys, the amount of quality of sound, I've never heard any other amp do that, going through all of those upgrades. I have heard the best of Macintosh, and sure, that's a sound that it's a lot more separated. Things are pulled apart. You can more easily understand what you're listening to. There's this sort of normalization, which is fantastic. There's this sort of grip on the speakers where you never exceed a certain amount of stress, so you never get fatigue with your ears. It does a lot of things to sort of park the sound in a very solid way that is impressive. But like I wrote here in my notes, these are the things that most other brands are doing. They are doing this thing like Macintosh are doing, in my opinion. This is just my opinion, where they're doing this fake clarity, fake focus, fake pulling things apart, fake space, fake air, and they have this black level that isn't really black. It's a sort of what do you call it? It's a sort of muted black sound, where things are just not reacting. And it creates this fake normalization. So in the end, it gives you no substance, and it gives you this sort of neutrality that isn't really neutral. It's kind of like a sedated neutral sound, where in a way there's more information, things are easier to understand, and everything's sort of pulled apart. So you, in a sort of an illusion, get more information with time, and it gives this effect, this sound of processing. And I want to mention this, not to make my audio note friend feel bad, because he did recently go from some previous gear he had to something called Esoteric. And Esoteric has some of these problems that I'm pointing out here to a much smaller degree, much smaller degree. But what I'm hearing with Esoteric, and it's not the newest, best Esoteric gear, it's some of the earlier gear, I'm hearing this fake normalization thing happening, where everything, I can probably listen to Esoteric for 8 hours a day, 4 to 8 hours, where with this OTO, I might only get through like an hour or 2, or maybe 3 on a good day. And you might think that, okay, wow, why would you want that? Why wouldn't you want to listen to music for, I don't know, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 hours? Wouldn't you rather want to do that than have this experience, which only lasts about an hour or a bit more? And I would have to say no, because the quality of the instruments is not nearly as good as this thing here. This thing costing a fraction of what the Esoteric costs. The meaning of what you're listening to, the urgency, is not close to this level. The true feelings and the true texture and the true vibe of the instrument, the artistic expression, is not close to this. But still, somehow, Esoteric, I don't know how they do it, but they have this sort of really special, unique algorithm that does so many things so much better than this auto amp. But still, I would say all of those things, to me, data, information. You can observe a detail much more easily. You can see something for what it is much more easily with the Esoteric. The Esoteric, in a way, I'm sort of torn a bit. The Esoteric gear that I heard, I think it's called the F05 amp that I heard at my friend's place. It's amazing feat of technical precision, but it has this problem that most gear has in the world, to a much lesser degree than the other gear. It's sort of like a simplified fake interpretation that tries to it feels almost like it's pulling the music apart, like pulling it apart. And it's trying to make it easy to observe, digestible, and non-offensive, so you don't have this usual amount of noise. And sure, this thing is a lot more noisy. I get it. And especially on the floor, a hell of a lot more noisy. But what I'm trying to say is that there are degrees of processing of sound where you make something neutral. There are degrees of noise where you're trying to control the noise, but still allowing the music to express itself fully. I feel that this thing can express itself fully. It's only a matter of question of how good you are at tuning yourself into this type of sound to make it fully sing. And I've done a pretty well job here. I have a DAC 3 modified, fully modified, about 30 years old. And I have one of the top 3 CD players ever made in this world, in my opinion, Audio Note CDC4. That has made it so much more easy to recognize that this here is just a whole other class of amplifier. If I did this thing here, and especially with the top power chords that I have about 4 of them in my system. If I did that on a Macintosh amplifier, you know what I would hear? I would hear a sound going past the illusion of what the manufacturer wants you to hear. I would hear a sound that says, you have to have a noisy power bar. You have to have this standard power bar thing. This makes Macintosh sound good. This makes Musical Fidelity sound good. This makes Aquaphase sound good. And all of those brands, even Esoteric to some degree. But let me tell you something. It's sort of an illusion having this thing. This thing can make a lot of things sort of on the surface sound a lot better than it really is. But then you sort of deal with stuff here. Try to deal with a deeper level of truth, like I do, with an Isolate box or other boxes that I've tried that are similar to that. And what you'll discover is that this thing peels off layers, making you fully understand what type of gear you are dealing with. This has a level of truth telling you exactly what this thing is doing. And now that I have these power cables here, they are not vibing with the audio note sound. They are directly seeing through audio note for what it is. Okay, so I'm past the illusion of what audio note wants me to hear. I'm here to tell you that even past the illusion of what they want you to hear, this thing is just world class. This is so pure. This is so much quality. Even after I made that video that I just showed you before, I still believe even this standard version that is only level 2, I believe that this is still the best value on the market. And I thought for several years after making that video, I thought that Technics SU-R1000, it is better than this. And yes and no. In some parts of the sound, it is a hell of a lot better than this. It's a lot more clear. It's a lot more direct. It's a lot more focused. It's a lot less noise. But the problem I'm running into with the SU-R1000 is that it doesn't want to fully get into the quality of the sound. It doesn't want to fully get into the vibe of the sound. It doesn't fully want to get into the musicality of the sound. Now, we could argue that those 3 things are deeply related to noise. Yes. But the thing I'm sort of realizing now is that the Techniques sort of belongs more in this type of world, where in order for the Techniques to sound 3, 5, 10 times better than most amps, it has to sort of be in this sort of veiled world where you're not fully dealing with the detail. You're not fully cleaning it up. You're sort of letting it do its own job, pulling a sort of half prank on you, making it believe where it makes you believe that that it's better than it really is. Once you start putting the Techniques on like a really good power conditioner, and you start cleaning up the noise that's in the system, of course the Techniques gets a lot better and is very close to this level of quality of sound. But at the end of the day, playing stuff like Buckethead, which is very hard to play, some very long guitar solos, you'll discover that these more simple songs, musical songs where you're listening to certain instruments. I can't really say exactly what those instruments are, but one of those instruments were listening to saxophone. If you listen to like the last part of when a saxophone plays, when it goes like, that sort of noisy horn-like sound, the Technics deals with that by muting it. So it goes perfect controlled noise, much more easy to identify what's going on. You can position things in its more appropriate, size. So yeah, the audio notes, basically most audio note gear is not really perfect at doing that, making everything in perfect proportion, perfect ability to find an instrument there, deep inside there. It just sort of becomes one whole blob that's live and in front of you. I get that. But the problem is that you just don't have that sort of spiritual connection with the Technics. It cleans up the sound so well that if you play some bad recordings on it, it sort of reveals its true nature. That the Technics only sounds good once you have superb tracks on your system, and you have to have a sort of A&E type of speaker, which nobody really uses with the Technics. And you have to have certain speaker cables. They don't ever talk about that, but that's a huge contributor into making the Technique sound a lot more natural. Most people will use speaker cables that just make the Technique sound even more bright and thin in sound. So I was wrong. The Techniques is an amazing amplifier, and yes, I am still going to get it as a sort of contrast to this type of sound, but I'm just saying this here is the best amp. And one of the reasons why it is the best amp, it's because I think it's the best design in the world. I remember my audio note friend even telling me at some point that this is the sound that you can scale the most in the world. If audio notes, no, let me just turn that around. If the world was smart enough to see through all the bullshit in life, all the fakeness, if the world didn't need fancy big boxes, if there was just one company in the world making this OTO, and everybody could see it for what it really was, and everybody could experience it at its level 4 and 6 that I heard it at, they wouldn't bother with most other tube amplifiers in the world that cost a lot more. They wouldn't, because they would hear the substance and the quality of this design. It's the potential of sound that you can take from this level here, like this level here, to this level here. That's what makes it basically the best amplifier in the world. I can, of course, do that with the Ongaku Kensai, and Gakuon, and all of that stuff from Audino. All of that stuff is great. It has its own different sound. I'm not saying anything bad about that gear. It's fantastic in its own way. But I'm just saying that this here is probably the best design that has ever been made in the hobby, in the hi-fi hobby, in regards to amplifier design. And I'm starting to think now that what AudioNote did, the choice that they did here, where they didn't make the sound completely neutral and linear with the frequency response of the speakers, I have a strong feeling now that It's one of the reasons why this thing sounds so incredibly good and shows its true character. I believe that these extremes that Audio Note are doing, let me just turn this page here. I believe that you can only achieve these extremes that Audio Note generally has with taste, texture, tonality, theme, style, emotional range, freestyle. This isn't. I would say this is mostly this product, OTO, as a signature that's doing this. But all the other products of Audio Note do also to some degree do that, and some even better than this. But what I'm saying is that in order for you to fully connect with all of these things that are on the list, which basically are probably the most important things that most brands are missing in this world, in order for you to get these things, you have to have a sort of bias in the sound that these speakers have, where it isn't a linear sound. It's sort of like a dippy, colored sound. I believe that is the case. That is how it does the things that it does, and I believe that that's one of the reasons why you don't get the perfect imaging. Now you don't get the Ensus thing where it's like one giant holographic 3D bubble that you're in, and you can see it with like your mind's eye. I believe that that's one of the reasons why Audio Note are not good at super precision precision pinpoint location of what's going on, and why things aren't entirely in proportion, and why the speakers are to some degree pumping out. Some people don't like that sound from Audio Note. My Yamaha friend doesn't like that pumping out sound of Audio Note, that very vibey type of sound. But I believe that in order for you to get these things to the extreme that Audio Note does, especially with this auto amp, that you have to do this with the speaker, that you have to have this sort of bias that this speaker has, where it's colored, where it isn't fully neutral and locked in on the frequency response. That's my theory. Okay, I could be wrong, but I feel that's how they achieve this. Okay, and that is why you get this thing as texture and taste, and this sort of tonality where you're getting levels of warmth within each other, and like you have a guitar, and you're not just hearing a generic guitar sound. You're hearing like the whole journey from this part of the guitar to that part of the guitar on those 3-5 minutes that the artist is playing that guitar. You know, you're hearing like an emotional range where it isn't just this plasticky metal-like sound that you hear so much on YouTube, where things are sort of tuned in a studio and it's just like that type of sound. You know, you're hearing a journey where tonality is just its own fantastic thing that's on a whole other level with this auto. So yeah, those are my views, and yeah, I've kind of made up my mind about this. It is better than the Technics SU-R1000, even though the Technics SU-1000 does beat it in many aspects of the sound. Yes, it does. But at the end of the day, you need to be able to play all the music that you own, all the simple, old, noisy stuff. And this thing can play that music probably 3 times better than the Technics can. So because of that alone, I would say that the Technics is perhaps, this is stretching the truth a bit, Technics is perhaps the second best one in terms of value and highest level sound, overall sound. But because of the theme, because of the style points, because of what I've written here, the really rare stuff, and not this, fake reality, modern reviewing style thing that most people measure things in. I think that this thing still beats basically all amps in the world, or at least potentially. And yeah, you probably need to hear this on an audio note speaker, DAC that is audio note, CD player, something similar like that. And you have to go through the journey that I went through, where you heard probably 5 different levels of transformers from audio note, and several different levels of resistors and caps and all of that. And when you hear that, it sort of becomes apparent that most of the things that we sell in the stores, the Macintosh, the Acrophase, the Musical Fidelity, the Hegel, and all of that stuff, it's just too nice in sound. Don't get me wrong, all of those brands have their level of doing their own thing. That's their own sound, their own this and that detail. I'm just saying, at the end of the day, it comes down to the quality, the substance, and this just has it in spades. I am absolutely enamored about the sound I'm getting from this, even though I've sort of broken away from the audio note silver top power cable sound and the silver speaker cable, which I could have gotten. If I went for that sound, I would just be totally locked in my room. And it would be this sort of very cult-like type of sound where it's sort of really violent, and it sort of almost traumatizes me to a degree that is just heavenly. And I've sort of broken away from that, doing these other types of cables where I see more through the sound, developing the sound, testing gear. This is sort of like more of an experimental sound, sort of understanding what the different things are doing instead of being fully into that religion. But this just gave me this what's it called, power cable, and these RCA cables. It just gave me like a whole new experience of the OTO that I didn't have that time when I made that review about 4 years ago. So I just want to say that this is still basically the best amp in the world. And sure, it still doesn't quite get up to the Jinro, Tomae, Ongago, Gaguan, Ongago, Kansai, whatever they're called, from audio note. It still doesn't quite do some of the things that those things do that are more extreme. But at its core, you've got basically one of the most reactive sounds ever, which changes its form and becomes something just a lot more magical throughout time. You will have so many amplifiers throughout the ages that will do its own type of thing that is so much better than this OTO amplifier. But the thing I'm trying to make you guys understand is that those amplifiers will still be this sort of thing, and that sort of thing, and that sort of thing. It's like a certain type of sound, where this thing here is sort of like a chameleon thing that adapts to whatever you put it connected to. I'm not saying that you can connect this to any speaker in any room. That's a serious limitation of this, yes. But what I'm saying is that you can hear a level of truth with this amplifier that you cannot hear with so many of the newer amplifiers that play sound so much clearly, that have 10 times better black background, have so much more focus, slam in the bass, and yada, yada, yada. There's a price to pay for those amps that are much better than this. And that price is that you get a sort of processing of sound that numbs the sound, that puts it in place, so you end up listening to only a very select few recordings doing certain types of sound. And don't get me wrong, all of those amplifiers, including like the Esoteric amp that I recently heard at my Audio Note friend's place. It's amazing. It's amazing in its own way and does fantastic things that this thing can't. But this is just the most versatile sound on a quality-like, substance-like, integrated, balanced-like way that I haven't heard from any other brands. And I've heard most gear on the market. Not all gear, but most gear. And trust me when I say that this amp is basically the best that exists, that is true. It doesn't get much better than that. So I hope that helps you guys. This is me logging out.